Alright, I'm back. So, just one thing. Forgot to tab these in. Looked a bit sloppy without that. That's better. Alright, we'll leave the server open so we can see what order we wrote things in. That way we won't make a mistake when we're reading. That can be a really frustrating mistake if you don't realize that that's what's happening. So, let's minimize that. Let's go to our client. Now, remember what type ID we wrote. We wrote, it's somewhere, it's in here. ID load current players. So that's the ID that we need in this case. I don't think I've written it here yet. So that's what we can do. We can load all the players. So let's make a new case. This is in the client, by the way, in the receive packets function. So case ID load current players and break. Okay, so it's going to receive the packet that the server just sent, and it's going to come here. So this is what we need, where we need all the code. So let's have a look quickly at our server and see how we started it. Oh, sorry, where is it? Okay, so the first thing we did was, the first thing we wrote was the type ID. So we can ignore that. That's the first thing we've got to do. We've got to ignore the type ID. So bsn dot ignore ignore bytes size of RakNet message ID. There we go. Okay, now the next thing we wrote was the number of players. Okay, so what we want to do is we want to go bsn.write, bsn.read. I'm going to make a different integer for this, just for now. I'm going to call it load players. I can't remember if you have to do it this way, but I'm just going to, because this will work. So I'm going to do it this way. We're going to read the number of players into load players. You know what, stuff it. We'll just read it into num players, which is already part of the class. So we've read the number of players. Now we can start a loop, pretty much the same way as on the server. So I is less than num players. I plus plus. You know what? I've made a stupid mistake. I've realized. Duh. I've done this in the server as well. My bad. That would come up with an error. Okay, that's fixed. Okay, now we need to read things. Okay, so bsn.read. And we're going to read in the exact same order that we did before. So this is where it gets a bit. I've got to add a few more things. Let me think how I want to do this. I'll be back in a sec. I can't remember. Alright, I remember. So we're just gonna make a couple of vec3s. Yeah. T-vec. What am I doing? Oh, what? Hey. 4. So this vec3 will be for pos position. This will be rot. This will be velocity. And this one will be omega. OMG! Oh man, my friend keeps talking to me. Alright. Okay, so we've defined those. We're going to reuse these vec3s over and over again every time I loop. So we're going to read pos x. So we're going to read entity position of the player x into pos x. And we're going to do that 3 times. Same for y and z. Then we're going to do the rotation. Rotation X, Y, Z, Y, Z. And we're going to do the velocity. Y and Z. And finally the omega. Oops, I've made it a capital V. That's wrong. Omega X, Y, and Z. And the last thing we did was the network ID, and we'll make another variable for this. Nope, we won't. We'll go bsn.read and save it in player network ID. That's it. So we've read everything, and now before we go through another loop and read it for another player, what we're going to do is we're going to actually initiate that player. We're going to spawn that player just like we spawned it. I'm just going to increase this. Just like we spawned it here. So let's just copy this information from the spawn player. We're going to spawn a player, but it's going to be player I. We're not spawning the num player's number, because that would be you. I. Then we're going to, okay, we don't want pos. We don't want those old variables. We want new variables. Rotation. We're going to set the network ID manager, which can stay the same, and we're going to set the player network ID of that player to this one. The last thing we have to do is apply our rotation and velocity. So once it's spawned, we can do that. So we'll go set body velocity. We're going to go player I p body, and we're going to set it to vel. That should do it. And we're going to do the same thing for the omega. And with the variable omg. And that's it. We're done. So that'll loop through that. It'll spawn the player and it'll set it to its position and velocity and omega, and then it'll do it again and do it again, do it again until it's done. Let's just double check with our server and make sure we got, yep, the last thing was that, so we're all good. We're finished. Let's just test these. I'll compile them first, of course, and we'll see how that went. Bugs. I'll fix these up and I'll tell you what's wrong with them. Just a sec. Okay, so I found my mistake. Very simple mistake. You'll notice if you go into your player.h, p-body is a private member, but we need to access that in the server, so we'll make it a public member. And we'll do that for the server as well as the so that's the client there, sorry. So that's working. And we got to do that for the server as well. Make p-body a public entity, not a private one. And compile that. Still got some errors. Come on, matey. BS out. Right. Okay. Small syntax error. Got a capital on the out there. Left of right. Okay, that would have been the same thing. Get network ID. I forgot these brackets here. And we'll play. And and it's working. So let's just quickly test it now. We'll start our server first, as always. We'll start our client. So, whoops. That wasn't very good. I was supposed to spawn something on the server first. Let's get rid of that and that. So let's start our server. Now we'll spawn something on the server. Spawned. Moment of truth, guys. Moment of truth. Start our client. Oh, look at that. It spawned it. It's already spawned there, you can see. Now we can spawn on the client, and it's exactly the same. Give yourselves a pat on the back. Now the networking is a bit more rigid. Now there's just a few more things to get it, a bit more rigid. The plain, people entering and people leaving the game. To get that rigid, it's quite important. Otherwise, people get annoyed with when someone enters a game and they can't see all the players, or someone leaves a game and their box doesn't disappear. So, for example, if I exit the client, it's still, the client player is still on the server, it's just not doing anything. So we're going to have to deal with that later, but I think next lesson just to make things a bit more exciting, we'll go over some movement, so we'll move the box and we'll play around with that, so with WASD keys, and yeah, so that should be good. And I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope you're enjoying the whole series, and hopefully I'll get that next tutorial to you soon. Adios.